And this week I want to add some dialogue to your PowerPoint presentation. You'll notice these first couple of weeks there's a lot of content, and so it can be a little overwhelming at times. With these presentations, I don't want to go over 15 minutes. So what I'm going to do is just kind of highlight a few points of emphasis for each of the slides and try to keep it under 15 minutes in duration. This week I do have a couple of assignments that I want you to complete. I'll send you an email to give you more information about those assignments, and I'll also give you until the end of next week to get those assignments completed. But the first one I want you to consider is, what is a positive learning environment? When you think about a classroom and you think about a positive learning environment, what does that look like? So if you go to the discussion tab, you'll find that particular discussion and what your task is for that particular one. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go through each of the slides and just talk about a few points of emphasis that I want to go over as it relates to Chapter 8 in your book. When we think about the ecology of the gym, we think about student self-discipline. One of the main things we're trying to establish with the students is we want them to be self-disciplined in everything that they do. We shouldn't be the one to tell them how to do everything. We want the students to take responsibility for the things that they are learning. We think about the management of the classroom. Notice bullet point number 2 says there is a strong relationship between management and content. In other words, one must reinforce the other. Why? Well, when we think about it, if we have good management of our classroom, then a lot of times the content is much more meaningful to the students. Without good management, many times the content just becomes busy work and stuff that we can do just to pass the time. So why is it so important? Look at bullet point number 2. It says it's much harder later. You've probably heard this mentioned before, but you'll hear teachers who've been doing it for a long time to set the tone from the very beginning. Be strict, be firm, have expectations for your students. If you start out that way, it is much easier to let off a little bit as the semester progresses. But if you start out and you're easy on the students, it is much harder to become firm and to reinforce what you want later on in the school year. To achieve higher levels of engagement, a couple of things need to consider. What happens to a teacher when this does not occur? Notice what the bullet points say. Students need to be able to act responsibly. Students need to be able to interact with each other in positive and supportive ways. One of the biggest time fillers in physical education is management, dealing with behavioral issues. You want your students to be able to get along. You want your students to be able to work together, but you also want them to be able to act responsibly and act in a very positive and supportive way. Two distinct management roles: teaching what is expected, maintaining what is expected. So the question becomes, how do you maintain something? The main thing is you can't do it just once. It's something that has to happen over the course of a school year. Establishing a management system. My question is this: do some teachers take a negative approach to teaching? The answer is probably yes, and you've probably experienced that as a student, or maybe you've seen it firsthand as a teacher. But most people want our teacher to be positive, especially at the elementary level. So we want to try to avoid having a negative approach. For a positive climate, there's two things we're going to look at: expectancy and protocols. When we think about expectancy, the questions become why, when, and what are the type of expectations that we have. Many times it's going to be related to behavior. It's going to be related to how they handle equipment and transitions, and also as it relates to skill performance. So what kind of protocol should we have as a teacher? Entering the classroom is going to be a protocol. For example, how do you want them to enter? Each day when they come to class, do you want them to run in and get started? Do you want them to walk in and have a seat on the line? Do you have a certain designated spot for them to sit at when they come into class? You're going to establish a protocol for each of these areas. So one of the things I want you to do this week is you're going to think of a game that you can create that's going to help reinforce one of the protocols that you would establish in your physical education classroom. You'll find this document on the Dropbox on eCourseWare. You'll also find a document there, a template that you can use to develop your game for teaching protocols to your students. Entering and leaving the gym, the main thing you want to emphasize is practice. But what are the problems that could occur? One problem is, what if you want them to walk in, but one student constantly runs in? Well, it's kind of hard to stop students from running when it comes to physical education. But if that's your expectation, that's what the students should be able to do. They need to act responsibly and exhibit positive behavior. But you also need to keep in mind that when they arrive at your classroom, they're ready to move and they're ready to be active. Starting and stopping, how does this help you as a teacher? You have to reinforce your starting and stopping protocols, but it's also going to help you to maintain better control of your teaching. Equipment, the main thing I want you to remember about equipment is don't waste your time. Have your students help you. I've seen too many teachers spend a lot of their effort getting equipment out and putting equipment up. Students are more than responsible and more than capable of helping you when it comes to dealing with equipment. Listening to the teacher, what is the best formation? Why do you need eye contact? It's really important for you to consider these things as you're instructing your students, because again, you're not going to have them sitting and listening to you for a long period of time, but you want to put them in the most optimal position so that they understand what it is you are teaching them. Placing into groups and pairs. Notice number 1 says avoid boys and girls. In other words, you don't want to have boy groups and you don't have girl groups. Sometimes this can cause friction between groups. The boys will be saying, the boys are better, and the girls will be saying, girls rule. And so sometimes you may allow them to get into groups of boys and groups of girls, but try to mix it up, because one of the things that's great about physical education is the opportunity to work with all the students in your class and the opportunity to get to know them better. Number 3 says use some sort of system. That's just going to be easier and it's going to save you a lot of time. Teaching protocols, one thing to remember, always be firm, but be warm. Okay, some people are firm and just mean about it. But you can be firm, but you can also be warm. And the one ways you do that is catch them being good. Always use positive pinpointing. Let them know when they're doing something that is good in your classroom. Establishing routines. The whole idea is for classes to run more smoothly. Every good physical education teacher is going to have routines because it's going to help you to be more effective as an instructor. Basic principles for routines. Be specific. Younger students need structure. Many times as teachers we assume what they are capable of doing, but students need to know specifically what it is you want them to do. Reinforcing rules. Toward the end of the year, we start to neglect the reinforcement of the rules we established at the beginning of the school year. So it's always good to revisit your rules and remind students of what you expect of them when they're in physical education. So what are some rules? Well, here's another one that I want you to work on as it relates to a discussion for this week. I have a website that I want you to view, and it's going to provide some different examples of rules that other physical education teachers have established for their school. What I want you to do is I want you to pick some rules that you would use if you were to start teaching in elementary school tomorrow. So go to the discussion tab and post some rules that you would use in your classroom. As we look at these rules, look at number 3. Keep the number of rules to a minimum. You don't want to overdo it, because many times what happens, if I create 10 rules, I may reinforce 3 or 4 of them, but I'm probably not going to reinforce 10, and some of the rules just may not really matter because it may not be something that's a problem at your school, so you may not need a rule for that. So always be very cautious of the type of rules that you do create. Here's some different examples. Again, when you look at the website, you'll see some other examples that you can use, or some other examples of rules that you can use in the classroom. Management is never achieved. One of the things I want you to remember is that it does require constant supervision and reflection. Management is an ongoing process. As I've said before to my students, my first 4 years of teaching, every year I reestablish the rules and procedures that I used in my classroom, because what you find out is some things work, Some things don't work. And so you want to find the things that work and work well, and you want to consistently build off of those in the future years of teaching. And then finally, some essential keys. Design. How do you want to manage the class? Communicate, explain, give examples. More importantly, practice those that you have created. And finally, monitor. Be consistent, repeat if necessary, be firm with what you do, because if you have high expectations, that's going to be played out in how your students respond to your instruction. So that concludes Chapter 8. I hope this has been beneficial. Have a great day, and I'll see you soon.